Right, so we're just setting off from Cafe in the Machine now. So as you know, they've got the famous sign outside that says "Don't be a dick," because they don't want people being causing ASBO-like situations outside, which is understandable. And it's a bit damp at the moment, so also going to take it easy. So just in comfort mode right now. Comfort suspension, comfort transmission. So this is an old school Mercedes AMG, which is what I like. I did have a newer AMG, a C43 2019, which is 4-wheel drive. I tuned it up to about 500 horsepower. It was a fun car, reliable, but I didn't have the quality of the older Mercedes that I liked. And you know, I got a bit bored of it. You know, people tried to race me a lot. Someone tried to nick it a couple of times. So I was watching Auto Top NL on YouTube. It's quite a cool channel, you should check it out. Where they test cars on the Autobahn, and he bought an E55 compressor 2004, same year as this. It was silver, nice condition, and I was just watching that about 1 year ago today, and I just thought, this car is sweet, I need to get one for myself. I don't know how much engine noise you can hear there, but I'm giving it a bit of a tickle now, and it's just flowing along nicely. But the ride on this is lovely. It's got air suspension. It's called a Airmatic DC suspension, dual chamber. So it's air suspension on the front and the rear, and the ride height is adjusted by changing the volume of air in the chambers. It's got 2 chambers. So the moment it's in comfort, if you put it in sport or sport 2, the car drops a little bit, and the air suspension stiffens up. If you drive over, I think, 140 kilometers per hour or 80 miles an hour, the car lowers itself automatically as well. But yeah, back to the car. So I had the C43, I got bored of it, I sold it. I bought this car a few days after seeing one on YouTube. I've had it for about 1 year, done about 2,500 miles, enjoyed it quite a bit. This is one of the lower mileage ones, done 55,000 miles, 52,000 at the time. You'll be hard to find another E55 estate, especially that's done less miles than that. But it's been well maintained. The previous owner used to collect 55 compressors. The guy before him was the manager of a Mercedes dealer, so it's been well looked after. But you know, you do get some issues with older cars just because they're old. But you know, otherwise I've not really had many problems dailying it, other than the fact that it uses a ton of fuel. Which is where the newer V8s, although they're a lot more powerful, they're also a lot more efficient, because they've got things like variable valve timing, direct injection, whereas this has got none of that. So it's just a strong old school V8 that makes a lot of power, a lot of torque. Because it's supercharged, there's no lag whatsoever. It's just a naturally aspirated power curve, but moved up a lot. So as soon as you tap the throttle, the torque's there. And I've driven the CC63 with the M156 engine, which is obviously one of the AMG's best engines. But for me, I like the instant torque, because that engine you have to really wind it up to get the torque. This torque here just comes straight away. 2,600 RPM, you get maximum torque, 516 pound-foot, and that lasts all the way to about 4,500. But it still revs quite well as well, because it makes max power 6,100 RPM, which is not that far off the red line. So it's not just about low down, it does make good power up top as well. One problem with this engine, because it's supercharged, the intercooler sits in the V of the engine, so all the heat of the engine and the supercharger gets concentrated in there. So on a hot day, if you do a few back-to-back pulls, you can suffer heat soak, which is why on a stock car, or especially a tuned car, you need to make sure your charge cooling system is upgraded. So the basic upgrade is to put the Bosch 010 charge cooler pump, or you can put other pumps on there, and to replace the standard plastic heat exchanger in the front bumper with a larger alloy one. It's going to do a little overtake on this car. With the alloy heat exchanger, so you'll find with those, as long as it's not too hot, you'll get much better recovery time. When you're back-to-back pulls and your intake air temperature, you'll feel that the car roughly has the same power on back-to-back acceleration. So I've measured this car 100 to 200 kilometers per hour in about the 9.3 to 9.5 second range. which is pretty quick for an 18-year-old car. To put that into perspective, brand new Audi RS4 Avant 2019 model, that does 100 to 200 in about 9.9-10 seconds. A brand new GLC 63 AMG S does 100 to 200 in the high 9s, so this is about the same speed as that for an 18-year-old car with only a 5-speed transmission. You know, in its day, it was about on par with the M5 V10. If you go on YouTube and watch drag race videos of the two cars, they're pretty much always neck and neck depending on which car got the better launch. There was the C5 Audi RS6, but that was considerably slower, especially on a roll. 0 to 100 for that car was well over a second slower than this. I've got a road and track issue from 2003 that did 0 to 100 to 0 mile per hour test. The E55 was pretty much the same speed, exact same speed and time as a Ferrari 575 Maranello with the F1 box, and it was, the E55 was quite a lot faster than the Audi RS6. That only had about 414 horsepower, no sorry 444 horsepower, but only 414 pounds-foot of torque, whereas this has 516 pounds of torque. With the Audis, with that ZF gearbox, they had to limit the torque because the gearbox in that car couldn't handle it, which is one of the reasons why you don't see many older C5 RS6s, about A, because they didn't sell that many, and B, they have a lot more issues with the engine and the gearbox. If you have stuff going on with the engine, you have to remove the engine. For example, to do the timing or the turbos, you've got to take the engine out, whereas in this car, because it has only got single overhead camshafts, it's got quite a big engine bay, there's quite a lot of space around the engine to work, so it's quite a simple engine to maintain relatively, and it hasn't got the con rod bearing issues that the M5 had, which could pretty much total your engine. That also obviously had the SMG gearbox problems, which this hasn't got, because obviously it hasn't got an SMG gearbox. It's just got a slower but stronger 5-speed. You can get TCU tunes, which I probably will get from maybe TJ Merry. You can do TCU tunes to increase the shift, decrease the shift times and make them more aggressive. So your rolling acceleration becomes much quicker just by having a faster gear shift. I'm just going to lower the window a little bit just so if you can hear the bit of engine noise. I don't know if you noticed the wheel span quite aggressively there, just going around that 10-mile-an-hour corner, because this car unfortunately has got an open differential. Better put it in, I think I'll put it in Sport 1 mode now, because it's driving a bit quick. You don't want to have the suspension fully soft. Yeah, so this car's got a fully open rear diff, which obviously can make it a bit hairy when the weather's damp. The traction control is not too bad. It's obviously an older one, but the traction control was on then, but you can still get the back end out, which you may have noticed. The car squirreled a bit there. In this year, the 2004, you can turn the traction control fully off and do burnouts if you want. In the 2005 and 6 cars, you can't do burnouts in them. The 2005-6 cars also had one extra tooth on the gears to drive the compressor, so those cars have got higher boost pressure, so they make a little bit more power, about maybe 510-ish, which was the same for the facelifted SL55 and SL55 2005-6 models. So if you put a smaller pulley on those cars, you have to be careful, because that pulley, so that supercharger already spins faster, and if you put a smaller pulley on the facelift cars, you've got to really be careful. You've got to upgrade the cooling system as well, otherwise you're going to run the supercharger too hot and you're going to cause problems with the IATs. But yeah, just pootling along, just tickling the throttle. It makes a nice, lovely burbling sound. Hopefully you're picking that up on the microphone, on the standard GoPro mic. So I'm going to put it into sports mode. I'm in sport suspension 1. On this car, the button down here for the comfort and sport, it only changes the gearbox, it doesn't do nothing to the engine. So it's a very simple car, which is what I liked. So we're on a dual carriageway now. We're just going to boot along a bit, just when we get a safe spot. We'll just show you some of the rolling acceleration. Again, the car's got very tall gears, so on a pull you'll typically only be in second, third. You might get to fourth if you're going really fast. So yeah. car's auto upshifting at about 6,500. Put it back into comfort just to get the rev down. So yeah, I mean, this car makes mincemeat out of people when you're overtaking on a dual carriageway. Because there's no lag, you just get instant throttle response, instant power, even with the slow gearbox. So you don't really have to floor the throttle to change down, because even if the slow gearbox doesn't change down, you've got a ton of torque anyway. So it's very easy to overtake. There's no lag, no nothing. You can use these small buttons on the back of the wheel to change the gears, but the response time is not great. So I don't really tend to mess around with those buttons too much. Let's put it back into sport mode now. If you do a TCU tune, you can get an agility mode, which gives you an extra mode on there, which helps in quick driving. So yeah, the steering on this is pretty slow. This is a 2004 car. So yeah, just wind it up, still in third gear. Just accelerates very effortlessly even, which is a bit of a cliche, but when you've got a supercharged V8, even with 2 tons, it's not a cliche in this car because it does apply. Yeah, so this is an 04 car. It's got a slower steering rack, and it's got the standard W211 suspension arms. If you have a 05-06 car, they have a faster steering rack from the CLS, and they have CLS lower control arms, which gives you quicker steering and maybe sharper handling. It's a nice little Ford Anglia or something. Escort RS200 Opel GT is some nice cars on that side of the road. So yeah, the facelift cars have got slightly quicker steering, which would be good, because a nice Chevy pickup there. It looks like they're all heading to Cafe de Machine. So yeah, it has got a very old school Mercedes steering, quite slow. It's got a massive steering wheel. Even in Sports 1, the suspension is still relatively soft, so I'm going to put in Sport 2, which will lower the car a bit as well. But yeah, one of the appeals of the car is the lovely ride comfort. Because I've driven a new E63, the W213, and even in comfort mode, that car is very stiff. In Sport Plus mode, it's like the ride feels like concrete. Just going to do a quick overtake on this car because it's really getting on my nerves. I don't know if you can hear much engine noise there, but it makes lovely sound, but it's not obnoxiously loud inside the car. I did have a decatted C43. That was insanely loud even inside the car, because that car had less soundproof and obviously no cats. On this car, once you're going faster, the cats do tend to still quiet it down a little bit. But you know, it's nice, especially on the outside. We've got a Toyota GT86 here, which is supposed to be a sports car, but it's kind of holding me up a bit. So I'm just going to overtake him. They call that a sports car, but you know, it's got about 187 horsepower. Those things are slow as hell. All they do is they just, you can drift them, but that's about it. This car may need new rear subframe mounts, because the back end on the when you floor it and lift off, there is a little bit of a swaying from the rear end, which is either because the suspension is soft, but more likely it's because the subframe mounts probably need replacing. But yeah, on A roads it's fine. It's not really a B road blaster, which is probably obvious, you know, when you look at the spec of the car and the size of it. But yeah, A roads it's fine. Dual carriageways, obviously unrestricted motorways are where this car shines, or maybe the drag strip if you happen to partake in a drag strip. The E55 estate does put down quickest 0 to 60 quarter-mile times typically, because of the more weight on the rear axle, like 125 kg extra. This gives you a lot more traction. At high speeds, an E55 saloon being quite a bit lighter would tend to give you faster times, but can be more difficult to get traction in those cars. If you look at MSL, who is one of the major tuning companies for AMGs who've tuned my previous cars, he was the first guy really to kind of tune the E55 in this country. They got theirs up to about 700 odd horsepower. He was getting, I think, low 11s in the quarter mile, which is pretty impressive. But the world record time for a compressor on a stock supercharger, I think Moscow Supercharger have got a car into the quarter mile in the low 10s, I think high 9s, which is very impressive. You can put the Wisec Supercharger on these cars, which is quite an expensive conversion, but they do tend to heat soak very badly. So performance-wise, if you just do the bolt-ons like the headers, injectors, smaller supercharger pulley, split cooling with a separate cooling tank, things like that, you can get well over 700 horsepower out of these, no problem. Torque, probably, you know, around 750 pound torque easily. But the problem with this car is the traction is not great at low speed. So really, there's no point going too crazy on the power because you can't use it even with stock torque and power. In dampish weather like this, you've got to be careful with the back end. But yeah, it's just a nice car to cruise around in. Just, you know, stab the throttle, hear the torque. I did race C63 W204 model, which was a 6.2, as you probably know. We did some pulls on a 52 120 on obviously a private road. The thing with the 6.2, obviously it makes a bit more top end power, but on the C63 the top end is strangled on that because the throttle doesn't open fully. So although that car had headers on it, on the roller race, this much heavier estate, it beat the C63 Coupe by about 1 to 2 car lengths on a 52 120, just because this car has a lot more torque, 516 versus about 450 460, and it comes instantly, whereas on the C63 on the NA model you have to wind it up. If you look at the E63 W211, however, which has 510 horsepower, which is a bit more than this, on the top end that car can be a little bit quicker if you look at head-to-head races. Plus obviously being naturally aspirated, that car doesn't suffer from heat soak. But otherwise, you know, they're roughly similar. It just depends which power delivery you prefer. For me, it's got to be the supercharger because you just get the instant torque, and you get a faint supercharger wide in the background as well. Plus this car is obviously much easier to tune. If you want to tune it, you just put a smaller pulley on it and you've got way more power. Within half an hour, just do a pulley and a ECU update. I'm going to try and put it in manual now because the gearbox is holding onto the lower gears a bit too much. So I'm in 3rd gear. We're in Sport 2. It's quite a windy road, as you may be able to tell. We've got a bit of a compression and a dip in the road there. It's quite damp, so I'm not going to go too crazy. But yeah, this is certainly not the car for a windy, undulating B road, but the suspension, even in Sport 2, is comfy. But you know, you do feel the weight of the car up front. The engine in this weighs about 240 kilograms, so nearly a quarter of a ton. So it's quite a heavy car, and the engine isn't that far back compared to like something in an M car. So although with the estate you do get the advantage of having a bit more of an even weight distribution, it is actually slightly rear heavy in the estate, which is interesting. Just got quite a bit of wheel spin there. Traction control kicked in. Traction control is still on in 3rd gear. Now it's turned off. Yeah, in the estate apparently you've got 49% of the way at the front, 51 at the back, because it has got quite a long rear overhang, which helps. But you know, it's still, compared to its length, the car is still relatively narrow because AMG didn't make the cars any wider, and it's quite tall, so the centre of gravity, even in Sport 2, it feels quite high. So when you're cornering, it doesn't obviously feel mega sharp. This car is not really about corners. It's just about having fun, mainly in a straight line and doing some power slides. I touched on the brakes on the walk around earlier. The brakes are brake-by-wire. So you press the brake and then the computer figures out how much pressure you need by looking at the pedal position, and then electro-hydraulic system puts the pressure to the brake calipers, and then that gives you the braking. So there's no delay, but there's no feel whatsoever in the brakes. So the brake feel is shit. So obviously one of the things you like in a performance car is you want to have good feel. So because it's got hydraulic steering, there is some feel in the steering, but obviously it's not great, and it's quite slow steering and there's no feel in the pedal. But the brakes are very powerful. You've got 360mm front brakes, 330mm rear brakes. In the front, as I said earlier, it's got 8 piston front calipers with auto drying features. So the brake calipers, the brakes dry the discs when it's damp, like now, which is quite a cool feature to have, so when it's very wet you don't suddenly step on the brakes and have no brakes. The problem is when you press the brakes about 200,000 times, the SBC unit needs to be rebuilt, so you can't really drive the car because you've got no brakes. The only brakes you have there are the emergency brakes, which is a tiny master cylinder which only works on your front brakes, so if your SBC light comes up then you can only really drive the car to the garage. That's about it really. In front of me now I've got a Range Rover SVR, which is interesting because that's really one of the few other modern cars that has a supercharged V8. Obviously that engine was used in the Jaguar F-Type SVR, the XJR, and the XF. Yeah, that also used that engine. So yeah, that's one of the few other modern cars to have a supercharged V8. That only has a root supercharger. This has a twin screw supercharger, which is more efficient. So it's basically two screws which intertwine. The lobes intermesh into each other and they spin towards each other, I think. Yeah, they spin towards each other, and it sucks the air from the throttle plate, which is at the back, through to the front, and then it goes down into the intercooler. I've just thought it there because I heard the Range Rover put his foot down, so obviously I'm not going to let him have all the fun. Yeah, so this is a twin screw supercharger, which is the best kind of supercharger there is. The Ford GT 2005 has it, and the Dodge Hellcat has it as well. Which is interesting because the Dodge Hellcat and the Charger Hellcat, that has the same basic chassis as this from 2004, so those are quite old cars underneath, and they also have the same supercharged system. So this is kind of what's known as the granddaddy of the Hellcat. So yeah, so I hope you're getting a good sound of the engine through the GoPro speaker there, because it's just got a standard GoPro speaker. So I want to shout to MSL because they're the one of the people that got me into AMGs, and you know, he's done servicing on this car for me, he's done a few little upgrades here and there, he's given me some tips. Also to Legit Street Cars on YouTube, and also AMG Meister, because they've got some really good E55 AMG compressor content on their channels. Give you a lot of good maintenance advice and tell you what good upgrades there are. Hopefully this Range Rover SBR, I know he's turned off, otherwise I could have a nice run with him on that road. So yeah, those channels have got some really good E55 compressor content on them. They've got a good automotive knowledge. There's a lot of people who are YouTubers these days that don't really know jack about cars. They just like to record videos of cars making pop and bang noises, which is fine. And they like to play silly music over the videos as well, which I'm not really a fan of. So yeah, also we're really into Harry's Garage. He's a really good really good guy. He's got some wicked car collection. He knows a lot about cars. Also Jay Leno, he's got a really good car collection, very knowledgeable as well. Ian Tyrrell, who rebuilds and restores classic cars. Obviously he knows a lot about engines and rebuilding. If you go on his channel, he's got some good stuff. But AMG Meister, Legit Street Cars, really good content. Auto Top NL, who tests cars on the Autobahn, who's also got an E55 compressor. He's got some good stuff there as well. So I'm going to go into a dual carriageway now. I'm going to open it up a little bit. So I'm going to put it in second gear now. I'm going to hit the throttle. Because we're going uphill, we didn't get any wheel spin luckily. So we're still in third gear. Hopefully you can hear the engine purring away in the background. I had to slam on the brakes there because this slow driver is in the way. So yeah, this car it just takes off. Dual carriageways, motorways, autobahn is where this car really shines. But the engine noise inside is still not too loud, even with a few little exhaust mods. There's relatively little road noise. I'm going to put the suspension into comfort mode. You can probably see now that the car is a bit less bumpy now. But because I'm doing above a certain speed, the car will be slightly lower than it would be otherwise. I'm going to put the gearbox into comfort mode. So yeah, it's a good solid car. It's obviously very thirsty. Maintenance wise, obviously we know the air suspension bags lines can leak and need replacing. The air suspension compressor can need replacing. Again, it's not that complicated to do. On the plus side, it gives you a very nice ride. So I'd rather keep the standard air suspension, not put coilovers, because then, you know, why would you put coilovers on a car like this? This is not like a racing car, it's not a tuner Japanese car. But you know, if you want to put coilovers, that's up to you. The other thing is the SBC pump will need rebuilding after a certain time, but again, that's not too expensive. Regarding the engine's very solid. You just have to do the valve cover gaskets. You've got to change the charge cooler pump. You've got to change the 24 spark plugs every now and then. Change your supercharger belt. You can change the supercharger oil, which is pretty easy. Gearboxes are solid. You just have to rebuild them after maybe 120,000 miles. Other than that, you just got to change the fluid and filter, which is a pretty easy job. This gearbox can handle a lot of torque. We've got a nice straight here. Just going to put the foot down. Lovely. You can hear the engine purring away, but yeah, it's just effortless. Again, yes, if you know about the car and you've got a good garage, it's not too bad to maintain. Again, it's complex, but it's not as complex as the newer AMGs, and the build quality is a lot better. Like the interior, the door cards, they're not rattly. Even on the lower door cards, the inside is got you know, it's got the felt lining on the door cards, so they don't rattle. You know, you've got a nice little cup holder here. You press that, you've got this automated cup holder, which is quite small, which is you know, in period in Germany they didn't really used to go to Starbucks and get massive 1 litre or half a litre Starbucks canisters. Other cool thing is here you've got one sun visor there, but you pull this out, you've got 2 sun visors, which you don't get on new cars. Which is, if you look on the Straight Pipes YouTube channel, they really love their double sun visors. And Jacob on the Straight Pipes, he also got an E55 compressor. Recently he's bigged me up on Instagram. He also appreciates how good that car is. So you've got that. You've got 4-zone climate control. So you've got two zones for the front, 2 for the back. This car's got heated seats, obviously, cruise control, electric seats, headrest, steering column. But you can also get vented seats. This car hasn't got that, unfortunately. You can get radar cruise control, which was one of the first cars to have it. You can get the dynamic seats where the seat bolsters change the pressure when you go around corners, which is a cool function. This hasn't got it, but it has got the adaptive, adjustable air cushion, which is super comfy. The seats on this are a lot comfier than on the new E63, because that's only got the basic lumbar adjustment. And also the leather on that, in my opinion, isn't as nice, not as durable. And if you have the racing bucket seats on that, it's like sitting on a piece of concrete. It's just not nice for cruising on the motorway. But yeah, it's just a wicked car for cruising. MPG wise, average speed 50 miles an hour. I've been caning it a little bit. MPG I'm doing 15 miles per gallon. But it's got an 80 litre tank, so you know, if you want to go on a long trip, if you be a bit sensible, you can probably get 350, 400 miles off a tank. It's not too bad, but obviously you don't buy this car for the fuel economy, you know, unless you're a bit more. But then again, the car wasn't that expensive to buy, even though this is one of the nicest E55 estates in the country. It was at the top end of the price scale. But you know, I'm going to keep it for as long as I can, and you know, I should be able to sell it for more than what I paid for it. But that's not really the reason why I bought it. It's just a nice sleeper of a car. One thing with the newer M's, especially Audi RS's, they're quite obvious that it's a fast estate car. Whereas with this, it's not so obvious unless you look at the tailpipes. So yeah, that's probably about it. I can't really think of much more to say about the car. Probably going to leave it fairly standard. We might do a little pulley upgrade on it. A little pulley and tune, take it up to maybe 520, 530 horsepower. As I mentioned earlier, it has got an open rear diff, which can make it a bit hairy. Could do with putting an LSD on it, but because this has got the earlier diff, I'd have to buy a later diff, which is the upgraded stronger diff, because for that you can get a wave track or a quaif limited slip differential internals on it. So as I said, this has got the 2.65 rear axle, which gives you quite tall gears. Even then, the fuel economy is still pretty crap. My fuel lights just come on again. You can put the 282 rear axle from the SL55, which gives you more sprightly rolling acceleration, but obviously it'll give you more wheel spin lower speeds, and it will obviously make your fuel economy, which is already crap, even worse. But yeah, it's just a nice comfy car, it's fast, it's a sleeper. It doesn't look amazing, but I don't give a shit. I like the styling of it, it's subtle, it's an AMG. There's a lot of cars that look sporty, but you know, they ain't that fast. Or there's newer cars I've mentioned, you know, like the Audi RS3, RS4, RS5. Under all, this can keep up with standard newer cars like that. It can keep up or beat a standard C63 W204. You know, it's still a quick car. It doesn't handle that great, obviously, but you know, if you know what you're doing, you can corner it quickly enough. It's got the new head unit, so it's got sat nav, it's got Android, it's got all that shit. So you know, it's got everything you need to daily it, apart from the fuel economy. But you know, who cares? So yeah, peace out. We'll catch you again another time.